Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the last session for today's remote, the Connected Faculty Summit. I'm very excited that you're all here. My name is Matthew Robinson. I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few things to note that you've probably heard before, but in case you haven't, on the left side of your screen, you'll see a panel with a few key tabs. The first one's chat, and that allows you to interact with your fellow attendees. Questions, where you'll be able to submit questions for the speaker to answer at the Q&A portion of this presentation. And then any other handouts that you see there that have been shared for today's presentation. If you need to, you can resize and rearrange the panels on your screen just like you would a browser window. You can click on the icons at the bottom of your screen to open or close additional panels, such as the speaker bio, abstract, and other handouts that have been shared. If you're curious what the icon is, you can just hover your mouse over it and it will come up and let you know what it is. Should you have a technical issue, please refresh your browser first. If that doesn't resolve the issue, then you can submit a note in the questions tab for assistance and someone will help you out. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be able to be watched on demand after the event. So if you want to refer back to this, there will be that option. Now, onto the presentation. I hope you're all here for virtual STEM labs, tools and faculty generated recommendations. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Wendy Howard. She is the director of the Pegasus Innovation Lab at the University of Central Florida, and I'll turn it over to her now.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, everybody, for choosing this to be your final session of the day just before our virtual happy hour. So thank you for joining. As Matthew mentioned, I am the director of our Pegasus Innovation Lab at UCF, and that falls under the Division of Digital Learning. And we basically serve as a project management office or program management office for institutional level initiatives in the digital learning realm. And for a little bit of context, let me talk about what got us here. Over spring break, this is probably a very familiar story to many of you, but over spring break, we made the decision to quickly pivot to remote instruction at UCF. And by the following Wednesday, we were completely remote. Pre-COVID, though, in the prior year, almost 50% of our total university student credit hours were either fully online or blended courses to begin with. And actually 33% were fully online courses. So that gives you an idea of the online learning culture at UCF to begin with. A lot of our faculty were already familiar with online strategies and techniques, and our students already had a familiarity with online learning at some level because 86% of all of our students took at least one online or blended course last year. And actually 75% of all students took at least one fully online course last year. So there was a little bit of familiarity with the modality of teaching fully online or at least mixed mode among most of our faculty and students. And so I like to make the distinction that a lot of our courses were already fully online when we made this switch, but many of them were face-to-face and quickly moved to what we call remote instruction, which is different from our traditional fully online asynchronous courses. So many of our worlds turned into this, right? We all moved to Zoom. And so for all of our traditional face-to-face classes and for our mixed mode or blended classes, a lot of it quickly moved to Zoom. And there were several teams within the Division of Digital Learning that jumped right into high gear supporting faculty with that transition through workshops, resources, individual consultations, and that worked for the majority of our faculty. But the elephant in the room was really, what do we do about those lab courses? You know, there are some very unique challenges to teaching lab courses online. We're very dependent on the technology and the equipment that's available in the lab rooms that's really hard to replicate online. And so I was asked to form a digital learning task force to look specifically at the challenges related to supporting our faculty who teach lab courses. When we pulled together this group, there were representatives from my team, the Pegasus Innovation Lab. We also invited several instructional designers to join us and librarians. Looking at how can we support our faculty who teach lab courses. Initially, the three-stage approach that we took was to just initially outreach to our academic departments. So we did a top-down and bottom-up approach to try to reach everybody. So initially we reached out to deans and chairs just to find out where were the gaps, where were their needs, what were they struggling with their lab courses. And at the same time also reached out to individual faculty who had already engaged with digital learning teams that we knew about that were teaching lab courses and asked them what did they need. While we were waiting to hear back, though, we were trying to be as proactive as possible. And so we spent a lot of time just trying to gather as many different potential resources to put in our toolbox as possible, trying to anticipate the needs of our faculty as those responses started coming in. So we tried to gather as comprehensive a list as possible of all the different virtual and remote lab resources available, interactive simulations and so forth, and just started compiling those resources with the goal of eventually being able to make recommendations to our faculty. And we were prepared to provide those consultations either at the college level, the program level, or even the individual course level, depending on those responses that we received. At the same time, in anticipation of these needs, we tried to reach out to as many external partners as possible because we knew we weren't the only ones struggling with this challenge of teaching lab courses suddenly in the remote environment. The State University System of Florida is comprised of 12 universities, and there was already a work group in existence for almost 2 years previous to COVID, and they were already looking at some of the challenges of supporting lab courses online or STEM courses in general. So that group immediately switched focus specifically to supporting lab courses in the remote environment and started meeting once a week to share those resources, to share challenges and try to bounce ideas off of each other and look at ways that we could support each other through this quick pivot to remote. We're also a member of the Florida Consortium of Metropolitan Research Universities, which is Florida International University, University of South Florida, and then us, the University of Central Florida. And so we got with them and very quickly arranged for a series of town hall meetings just to try to pull together faculty who teach in the same discipline. So we set up a biology-focused town hall meeting, one for chemistry and so forth. And so we tried to pull together faculty and give them a venue to share with each other what their challenges and successes were as they were wrapping up spring and moving into planning for summer remote instruction for their courses. At the same time, EDUCAUSE has recently formed a new community group around specifically supporting lab courses as we look into fall. So we've joined that group and we've been sharing strategies with them already. And at the same time, we were also very highly engaged with APLU, the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. And we were actually doing a lot of work with them implementing adaptive learning platforms. And at the time that COVID hit, we realized we all had similar challenges. So we kind of put the pause on the adaptive learning discussions and set up a series of phone calls to specifically look at how can we share strategies for this move to remote instruction. So we tried to pull together as many strategies and resources from those groups as possible, and also shared what we were finding along the way. And that led to the resource that I wanted to share with you today. So we built this resource, and at the top of the chat, I already pasted in the URL that you see at the bottom of this screen, but we posted publicly a list of resources that we had been compiling this whole time specific to discipline. Now, the original primary audience was our faculty at UCF, so the resources are organized under specific colleges that were engaged with us in trying to solve some of these challenges. But you'll see that they fall under the areas of engineering, computer science, health professions and sciences, nursing, sciences. So if you go out to that page after our session today, you'll see on the landing page there's some introductory information, some question prompts when thinking, what are some of the things I should really think through when I'm moving my lab course to the online environment or remote instruction. And then also links to some articles from some of the early successes we saw from partner institutions. And then you'll see a series of these buttons for each of the colleges that we support. And if you click on any one of those pages, it will take you specifically to a list of about 50 to 100 resources in that general area. So for example, if we were to click on the College of Sciences, This is just the beginning of the page. It'll scroll down, way down, about 50, almost 100 on this page, I counted, almost 100 different resources specifically for the College of Sciences. Now, we didn't necessarily implement all of these at UCF, but we wanted to have a comprehensive list where our faculty could go to one place and find all their different options available to them. The pages are organized under these different categories you can see across the yellow bar. So virtual labs and interactive activities. If you were to click that, it will jump down the list. Labs and simulations, video demonstrations, lab kits, other university and organizational resources. And then we found a lot of our faculty were interested in recording their own demonstrations. And so we put in some tips there as well. And that's interesting. I'm seeing in the chat some talk about the site went down. I pulled it up just before this session, so it is up, but you're right. I wonder if all this activity is causing some challenges. I've got it up on my other screen here. So yeah, it may just be a little bit slow with everybody hitting it at once. But I would encourage you to go out and, oh, I see, it did just time out on mine. Probably because we're all hitting it at once. So please check back after this session ends, and maybe if we spread it out, you'll be able to get back in. That's very unusual for that to happen. So anyway, this is a work in progress. We continue to evaluate different tools and add them to the list. For example, just last week, we did a series of demos with Visible Body that went well. It looked very promising, so we added that to the list. And we continue to look for more resources. So if you are working with any tools that you don't see listed out here, please send them to me. I'd love to add them to the list. And again, I can put that link in the chat. Here we go. So that you have it here. Yeah, you may just need to do a refresh until it loads. In the meantime, I'm going to keep going, but I would encourage you to check that out after our session ends and spend some time just perusing through the different the different sources that are out there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our College of Engineering and Computer Science. Pre-COVID, they were probably they were the least engaged with online learning at UCF, as you might imagine. That's pretty typical in a lot of colleges of engineering, computer science. They do a lot of face-to-face instruction. And so through this quick transition, they were probably the most engaged with our task force, trying to understand what their different options are and how they can best make this transition to remote instruction. So at that college level, they actually formed 3 of their own task forces, of which I was a member. I was invited to participate to bridge the work that was happening on our side with them. And so they formed 3 different task forces specifically related to their College of Engineering. One looking at lab courses and making recommendations for that. One focused specifically on the senior design courses, and then one task force specifically focused on innovative remote instruction techniques and strategies. And so you'll see, if you were to click, instead of the College of Sciences, if you were to click on the College of Engineering Computer Science button on that landing page, you'll see at the top of that page are these reports that specifically came out of each of those 3 task forces. And I'm going to give you a couple of highlights from each of those before we run out of time today. But I would encourage you to go out there when we're not all hitting the site at the same time. I would encourage you to go out there and download those reports and give them a close look. There's specific strategies from each of those 3 groups, and they were generated primarily by the faculty who were on those task forces. And then I was there as a representative of digital learning to help give some input and advice, but it was mainly generated by faculty. So let me give you a few highlights from each of those reports. And again, this is specific to College of Engineering Computer Science, but I think you'll find that a lot of it applies to other STEM fields as well. So for our remote lab instruction group, they found some themes that I have listed here that I'll talk about, but also in their specific report at the end, there's an appendix that lists out specific plans by course for the courses that were being offered in the summer. So everything from mechanical and aerospace engineering measurements to modeling methods in mechanical and aerospace engineering to civil engineering measurements, hydraulics lab, structural analysis, linear circuits, electronics, digital systems, signal analysis, computer organization, a whole bunch of different computer science courses. And each one has just a brief synopsis of how they plan to tackle their lab instruction. So if any of those topics sound similar to what you teach, I would encourage you to go take a closer look. But some of the themes that came out of this particular task force were many of the faculty wanted to go into their labs and pre-record their own lab demonstrations so that students could go back and pause, rewind, rewatch again. Prior to any live Zoom sessions, they could go in and watch those pre-recorded lab demonstrations. Then many of them also repeated the lab demonstration live via Zoom so that students could ask questions and stop them and ask questions as they were completing different steps. So a lot of times they repeated it again, but then if anything were to go wrong, because technology often fails us when we least want it to, they could also revert back then to the pre-recorded videos if something went wrong when they were trying to do it live. And then unfortunately, because students often were struggling to be able to collect their own data, they would provide experimental data for the students to then do their own analysis after watching the video demonstration. Wherever possible, another theme was our faculty tried to find ways to rewrite some of their laboratory experiments just using household items wherever possible. And when that didn't make sense, they also tried to make use of lab kits wherever they were available. And then it was highly critical for them to be able to have Zoom office hours to answer student questions, which inevitably came up. So those were some of the themes addressed in the report. But again, I would encourage you to go check it out. And particularly if any of those specific courses are of interest, there is a section where they give their specific recommendations per course. So then this report was posted. The intent was to prepare for summer. So this was posted at the end of spring as faculty were getting ready for summer. So just recently, we conducted a survey of faculty who were scheduled to teach lab courses in any of our disciplines, not just engineering, computer science, but any of our STEM disciplines. And we polled them if they taught in spring or in summer. What did you actually use? Did it work for you? And so these are some of the early results that came in. You'll see, kind of by discipline, what tools they said they were using. A lot of different disciplines made use of Khan Academy and some of the NOVA videos. In particular, I can tell you engineering really liked the PhET interactive simulations. But you can see some of the different things that were available here. And also, I heard from one particular instructor who teaches in mechanical and aerospace engineering that he gave me a little testimonial. He said he used the PhET interactive simulations to help explain theory much easier. And then he also used LabVIEW software to build his own virtual experiments, which was really interesting, using virtual instruments. He said this allowed students to examine and visualize real-life signals using virtual oscilloscopes and spectral analyzers into the experiments they normally would have done. So that's a little snapshot into what has been happening. But again, these are preliminary results. I did not hear back from all of our faculty yet, but these were some of the things that are already in use that I was able to document. So another task force looked specifically at senior design courses in engineering computer science. And while they came up with a lot of the same strategies that the general lab task force came up with, one of the major challenges that they were trying to solve was getting students remote access to the computers that were in their labs. Particularly in these senior design courses, they run very high-end, high computational software packages like Star CCM that students would normally have to sign up for times to come into the lab and use because it simply just wouldn't run on their typical home machines. So through this whole process, we were able to work with our IT department to set up Citrix virtual machines and run a proof of concept that went really, really well. And so now they're actually, with their summer courses, running it live in a pilot with their senior design courses to give students remote access to the software that would have been run only in their lab computers. The beauty of using the virtual machines is it doesn't matter how strong or what the processing power is on the student side. Theoretically, they could even access this through a tablet because all the processing occurs on the virtual machine. So they just log in and actually run the jobs on these virtual machines from wherever they are. The beauty behind this is it's a scalable solution, and we didn't even realize it at first, but now we've been able to increase access for our students over pre-COVID, because it used to be they had 11 machines in one computer lab, and students had to sign up for times when they actually had somebody available to staff the lab. Now they have 24/7 access through the virtual machines. So that was pretty exciting, and that came out of that work group. And then finally, as we start to run out of time, because I want to make sure I leave time for questions and answers, the Innovative Remote Instruction Group, I think the recommendations they came up with, some of them are highlighted here, really apply to any course, not just STEM courses and certainly not just engineering. But some of the highlights from their report are listed here. And one of the things that they were really concerned about trying to replicate was, if you're a faculty member, you've probably experienced this, where at the beginning of class, there are a bunch of students waiting in the front of the room to ask you something really quick before class starts. And then when you wrap up, there's like a line between you and the door of students trying to stop and ask you quick questions before you can leave. And so that was part of the face-to-face instruction that they were most concerned about trying to address through this Innovative Remote Instruction Group. And so some of the recommendations that they came up with were trying to create communication channels and easy ways for students to get those types of questions answered. And one of the recommendations that I really liked was to set up through your LMS, set up your online course materials in a week-by-week basis, which we often recommend for all courses, a nice organized way for students to access on a chapter-by-chapter or week-by-week basis your course materials online. But if you have a consistent layout, what this group was recommending was at the beginning of each week, starting a discussion, an ungraded discussion that's just open to everybody, where the instructor posts a message at the beginning of each week, kind of setting the tone for the week. This is what to expect. This is what's coming up. These are the common pitfalls you should be aware of. This is what's happening. And then leave it open for students to ask questions throughout the week. And then that way, when the instructor addressed one of those questions, the rest of the students had access to the answer, not just the student who asked it. And then at the end of the week, the professor was able to then do a wrap-up post via either text and or video to just kind of say, okay, these were the types of questions I've been fielding all week. Here's how to wrap up and look ahead to what's coming next. So that was a great way to replicate some of that ad hoc personal communications that were happening at the beginning and end of class that you kind of lose when you go to remote instruction. But there were all kinds of other recommendations in there. Another major concern, of course, was cheating. And so wherever you can replace multiple choice exams with authentic assessment is always going to be a benefit. I know our engineering college in particular is making great use of Honor Lock for proctoring of exams, but there are many of recommendations in that report as well that I would encourage you to check out. And so as we get ready for Q&A here, one thing that we did find was there was a lot of discussion about the benefits of using some of these lab simulations and some of these virtual labs. And that is, a lot of times in the actual lab, we have very expensive equipment. And so we're very careful to tell students, don't do this, don't do that, you're going to break the equipment. When it's virtual, they can break things. They can break the rules and see why in the real world they wouldn't want to do X, Y, or Z. So that was one benefit. And then also, safety precautions, we want to tell them not to do certain things because they might hurt themselves. Well, they can do that in some of these online instruction or online simulations. And so that was some of the benefit of using some of these virtual labs and interactive simulations. And what I'm hoping is, we all want to get back to campus. And what I'm hoping is some of these different strategies that we never would have tried otherwise, I think are turning out to be very beneficial. So a lot of our faculty are saying, yeah, normally I wouldn't have done anything with interactive online simulations for my labs. I want the students in there touching the equipment. But when we found that they could break the rules and figure out why they shouldn't be doing certain things, faculty are now saying, well, yeah, maybe at the beginning of the semester, maybe I will still use that simulated lab or that interactive simulation. So students can break the rules, see why they're not going to do that, and come into my actual lab better prepared and understanding why they shouldn't be doing certain things that would either break the equipment or hurt themselves. So while we're all eager to return to campus, I think this experience has forced us to think outside of the box, try creative approaches to labs that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And I hope that when we do return, we don't abandon the good practices that we've discovered along the way. Rather, I hope we keep what we found worked well and use that to enhance the traditional lab approach when we finally do go back. And so with that, I think we have about 5 minutes left for questions. So Matthew, I'll let you help out with that.
Sure, absolutely. So we did have a couple questions come in that I think are going to be beneficial to many. The first one is are there additional costs to students for virtual labs? And then how would you mitigate those additional costs for the virtual labs?
That's a really, really good question. And of course, we tried to find as many free or open source resources as possible, but some of them do have a cost associated with it. And on the website, we try to note where there is a cost. A lot of the vendors were giving away free trials, or because of COVID, they were giving free access for a certain amount of time, and then you would have to start charging. I can tell you, we just made a huge investment in Jove. Which is not cheap, but it's a huge library of explainer videos and lab demonstrations that we at the institutional level decided to invest in. I know there were some CARES Act funds that were distributed to some universities. You may want to look into using those funds. We're trying to be really, really careful not to increase any fees to students because there are already so many burdens on them already, and this is a really tough time to add any increased fees. But where you might be able to reduce some of the on-campus fees, you might be able to replace them with some lab fees to cover some of these expenses. I can tell you for Jove, they have a couple different tiers like most providers, but I believe we are paying, I want to say $49,000 for an annual subscription enterprise license, keeping in mind that we have 69,000 students, so we're pretty high in our usage, but they have much more affordable tiers as well. So there are some things that you can either pass the charge along to your students, or you can try to find some of that CARES Act funding or some other funds at your university where they might be getting redirected for the COVID pandemic that you might be able to make use of.
Sure. With 2 minutes left, this question's come up a lot, and I know we've heard it a lot from our faculty too, as at ASU as we explored virtual labs. What are you doing to meet learning outcomes for both like lab skills and lab safety skills via remote labs? I know you talked about the benefits of additional chances at something, being able to break stuff virtually that would be dangerous in the real thing. What about those skills that are needed actually in a physical lab?
That's a really good question. And there are some vendors that are specifically providing online safety courses, if that's what you're asking about. So those should be out on our list, and we continue to add some. I just learned of a new one last week that we're vetting, and we're going to probably add to the list. But there are a lot of vendors. Of course, they come with a price tag, but there are a lot of vendors that are doing safety trainings. But yeah, I don't have any specific recommendations there.
All right, I think we've got time for a very quick, short answer on this one, but it did come up a couple times. Were there liability concerns with experiments using home kits or household materials, or how did you address that concern?
That's a really good question, and I think you just have to treat it the same way you would with giving all of your safety instructions in the lab. You can't be responsible for what students are doing at home. The biggest concern with liability was actually in shipping lab kits. That's where most of our discussions went, was the liability of shipping chemicals or different lab supplies through the mail. But once they're in their homes, hopefully they're using, safe enough equipment that they're not going to hurt themselves with household items.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wendy Howard. I really enjoyed this presentation, as I'm sure many did. Thank you for giving us this experience, this wonderful resource that you provided. But we are out of time now, so be sure to explore the event more, and please enjoy this at the virtual happy hour that starts right now. Take care,
Great,
everyone.
thank you.